was saying. It did not mean. If there is no idea right now, then we I have two questions over there and the third question here. Okay?
Hello, my name is Stefan Ben. I'm from the Higher Education Reform Institute. Actually, I have three questions. The first one is, you find some attributes for the research or for the student that comes out from research-based education. So my question is how to assess such attributes. And well, my other question is about multidisciplinary aspects. Actually, research goes deep, or the researcher goes deep in this topic of study. And my question is, there a risk on multidisciplinarity? Because multidisciplinarity in education actually might lead to, or we can find innovation while comparing different disciplines, or not just research. And my last question is about stereotyping. I mean, a good researcher, what is about if you start research education at very low grades or need? My third question is about personal approach. I mean, a researcher should have his own approach when he's doing his research. So if the professors start implying their own approach on the students, maybe it will be risky at the younger ages. Thank you.
I didn't hear the second two.
I was.
Did you hear the second two? I got
Okay.
the first one.
Yeah, the first one and the second
Who would be able to answer or comment from the podium? Andrea, thank you.
I'll just comment on the first question, which I think you said was about, you made a very good point about it's all very well having these attributes all lined up, is how do we assess them? And what we've tried to do is put learning outcomes that would align with the attributes and try and put learning activities that would lead to those outcomes in all our curricula. But it's really challenging because you have to change your assessment practices to do so and to assess in the different ways. It so happens that a previous enhancement theme looked at assessment, so we've got a bank of tools and resources to do that. But I think your point is very well made and it's a real challenge. And to me, it feeds into something that I said we are finding difficult, which is staff development, how to get staff to engage with developing their skills around teaching and learning to deliver this type of approach.
Hi, my name is Alexander, and I'm coming from Yerevan. My question is addressed to our Russian colleague, Nadezhda. I'm just interested to know how you're granting this title, Research University, what are the criteria? Or whether you just establish them from zero, like a new university, and it's just, the goal is just research. Or you grant them to the existing ones, and how you're doing the procedure. It's just very interesting to know about this experience. Thank you.
Thank you. I will try briefly to describe this system of the National Research Institutions funding. So first two of them were funded by the state, by the presidential decree with the funding from the state. The universities which has got this legal status were to apply for it, and they have got funding for the implementation of the research activities within the university. Some of those 27 more were awarded this legal status of the National Research Institutions within the call of applications for this status, which was twice launched by the government. Some of them have got this status after being merged with several others. Some of them just developed their own proposal for the status, but most of the funding comes from the state. only in the program of the development of the National Research Institution, they have to show that they are going to receive sufficient fundings after a certain period from their research activities. So, but for this startup, they get funding from the state. Thank you.
Very much. I would like to thank Julika for this very interesting topic, and of course also Andrea and the other presenters. And I would like to ask Andrea a specific question about how do you go about carrying out this study? Because I thought I understood that very well. Maybe to create a mission, if you interviewed teachers and students, or I would like to know some detail on how you went about doing that. And then, if you allow me, I have two comments. One on the use of attributes, because that somehow puzzles me. Whether these are attributes, if we consider them attributes, my impression was that we should consider them attributes in developing attributes, because they are not something which the student has reached in a complete way. This is just an impression, but I would like to know your comment on this too. And then, regarding a comment you just made on the educational development for teachers. In my experience, it's easier to start developing through the assessment process. Then everyone, teachers as well as students, understand very well what we're talking about. And that's one good starting point for development. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't say my name is Carmen.
You asked how we went about doing the work. I didn't include the detail because it would take quite a while. Essentially, we set up 30 projects. We had a sectoral, we had institutional, each of our 19 institutions created a project team to look at research teaching linkages, their strategies, their promotion procedures, their policies, their practices within each institution. We had a project coordinator who brought the outputs of all of that work together and produced an overarching report. At the same time, we had 9 cross-sectoral disciplinary themes. So we bunched disciplines together, for example, health sciences, engineering, business. And across the sector, we nominated 9 project coordinators. We identified them to work with disciplines. They ran workshops, they engaged students, they talked to staff. And again, we had a project coordinator who worked on the key findings of all of those disciplinary projects and brought them back together. Also, a feature of our enhancement themes is we always have international advisors. So we had a range of international advisors come to discuss. For example, we had Angela Brew, we had Mick Healy and Alan Jenkins, we had Simon Barry. So we had a range of international people coming to talk in institutions, to encourage debate. So it's about coordination, and in doing that way, it allows each university to have ownership of what they want to focus on in that theme and to get staff engagement. So that, I can't remember your... Sorry, what was the second one? What was the second one? Sorry, I missed your second. Developing... Okay, sorry.
The question for 3 or 4 of you. I would like to know a little bit more about
Do you want to go?
Research.
What was the question?
The question was about
Organisation.
organization of research inside university or outside university or both, and evaluation of research. But be brief because that's not the topic of question.
So I can just explain how it works out in Russia. So mostly research is outside university, if this is not that exceptional case which we've discussed before. But for the most typical case, the research is outside university with the involvement of the academic staff for certain research activities.
Sweden?
I'm responsible for the microphone here.
In Sweden, it's like the research is mostly done in the universities, and it could be in collaboration with other universities or together with companies and the community and other participants. But it's mostly inside the university.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Yazid from Jordan. My question is about how the implementation of this new model in teaching affects student performance assessment and evaluation. And also, I would like to know also about the assessment, about the effectiveness of this new model, how you can know that there is really an enhancement and improvement of student achievements using this model. Thank you.
I think that the question was about the impact of the work we've been doing, correct, on student performance assessment and evaluation. And how do we know? And I think one of the challenges I put up in the last slide was exactly that. If you looked at our student performance across the last 4 or 5 years in my institution, you probably wouldn't find huge differences or changes. But I'm not sure that that I would have expected to see that, actually. The previous question about alignment of assessment, I still think we have a lot of work left to do on that. So I think the key is aligning our assessment to the kinds of attributes, and that's not easy to do. But we do evaluate student performance on a regular basis. Also, the work that we do nationally is evaluated by an outside team. In this case, it's a team from the University of Lancaster in England, who have evaluated all the work of each enhancement theme we do. And they do that by going into universities, interviewing staff, interviewing students, interviewing student associations to look at the impact on the learning environment. As yet, I would suggest that the student performance, we have seen across the sector improved performance in student retention, but it's not huge. We have good retention rates, but it's not huge. So I think it's a key question.
Student retention will also mean people going on from bachelor to master and from master to PhD?
No,
or is that
no.
retention just staying in the program and not dropping out?
Retention's graduating with a degree from some university at bachelor's level. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. I would like also to thank the organizer of this conference and for the choice of a very interesting, relevant topic. My name is Azura from Morocco. I have 2 questions. First one, do you separate between the sciences and the humanities in this philosophy of education-based research? In a sense, the science departments, because they have laboratories and they are research-oriented, they seem to be more prone to use research-based philosophy. And the second question, from the perspective of the students, at what level will you really push hard for integrating research and teaching? Will you start with the first year? Like in Morocco, in the humanities, I belong to the Faculty of Letters and Human Sciences. The first year students are still struggling with language and basic ideas. So if you add research to how can we do that, and how do you do that? Okay? And or would you like to aim for later levels of the students at the level to be maybe the masters onward? Thank you very much.
The work that we did in Scotland suggested actually that the sciences weren't any better. In fact, probably not as clued in, I thought, as the humanities, because from day one the humanities were embedding it as process, how you approach critically evaluating pieces of work, etc. Whereas in many of the sciences there was a belief amongst the academic staff that the knowledge was hierarchical. So you needed to take the first year or two to build the knowledge. And so there was this sense that students weren't really able for it at that early stage, which is something I disagree with, which takes me to the second one, which is that we are pushing in our institution for first years to be engaged in that research process or culture as early as possible. And my point about the schools reform is that in 3 years' time in Scotland, we are going to have students who have been taught in a different way and who will expect a different way of being engaged with.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Thank you. In Dacia, here from Georgia. I have two questions to our Russian colleague and one question to our colleague from Sweden. I'd like to ask our Russian colleague concerning the status of the people which are doing their PhDs. They're called in Russian aspirant, and are they still considered researchers or are they considered PhD students? Because I know that there was a discussion in Russia during the last years, and then I would like to have more updated information. And also, I would like to ask you about the universities which don't do research. You said that in most universities, research is outside the university, you know? And in these cases, the professors are obliged to make their research or their professional development, and how these universities without research are dealing with the doctoral studies, PhD studies. Well, and the last question to our colleague from Sweden. You mentioned in your presentation that some universities are not allowed to have doctoral programs. And I think that's a crucial point for some other universities doing in many other countries. Which are the criteria of allowing the university to have a doctoral program? Thank you.
Thank you. So first about the PhD students, you have correctly named them aspirants. They are still within this status in our country, and this PhD school is still under development. But the status of the aspirant is mostly like a researcher, so they are doing research. And coming to the second question, I would say that first of all, not all universities in Russia do have doctoral studies. Only part of the universities have doctoral councils and doctoral studies. Those who have, they conduct research, but not in that scale, which can be considered as a sufficient research. But mostly they are involved in external research activities with the special research institutions, academic research institutions. Just for the audience to distinguish that besides these national research institutions, in Russia we have academic institutions, academic universities, and academic research institutions, which are dealing only with the research. So this is the question. Thank you.
So let's see if I can explain this. Before we had big universities in Sweden, and then they were growing smaller high schools, högskolor, smaller institutions for education, higher education. And those didn't have the right to examine doctorates in the beginning. But the people who were actually coming there for working, they were still doing research, but they were doing it for the bigger universities. So they were building a group in the smaller high school. And when they had grown enough, so to say, they were able to apply for doing their own, having their own doctorates, so to say. And the criteria for that, I mean, it's, well, of course you need to have the education there in that area, and you have to have a big group enough and publish and all this. And it's evaluated from every time you apply for it, so to say.
Okay, thank you. May I ask the following interventors to be rather brief, because we are running out of time a little bit.
I'm from Egypt. My question maybe goes, maybe Scotland and Sweden cases because of introducing that approach to existing culture. I'm a graduate from Scotland myself, and I still remember the key distinction between the research starts professors and the student starts professors. They were kind of two different groups. How, in practice, in both cases, you brought that culture of research-based education to the daily practice of the universities. Did you invite research-oriented professors to take part in education, or I think it would have been very difficult to promote or to encourage teaching-oriented professors to go into research? So just on a pure practical level.
We still have a situation where not all of our superstars are teaching in the classroom, many of them do. But what we have done is, I think a very good way to moving people's behaviours is by providing incentives. And so we're very clear with recruiting staff now about the role of teaching. We have radically revised all our promotion criteria. And basically you won't take the first step on promotion if you don't do good teaching, and you don't have good peer feedback, and you don't engage your students. So it's a slow process, but practically addressing the recruitment of staff, providing, so all our staff undergo compulsory training, all the new staff, so they all do a postgraduate certificate qualification in teaching. Research-based teaching is the essence of that certificate. And adjusting the promotion criteria are the ways to incentivize staff to engage.
I was very struck by the Swedish colleague who said that one of the big challenges in Sweden was the low percentage of staff teaching with research background or actually engaged with research. Because in the UK recently, the Times Higher has published some statistics about the number of staff with doctorates teaching in UK institutions, and even those which regard themselves as elite. It's something like 87%, it's not 100% of academic staff with doctorates, and in some institutions it's as low as 12%. And I think that while everybody here, by definition, is really committed to the concept of research-based education, I just wondered whether we're recognising some of the really practical situations which are arising. First of all, as we heard in Sweden, and I'm sure it's true in Scotland, I'm sure in Scotland 4 or 5 institutions have about 85% of the research income. And this is happening in all our countries. There's a concentration of research income. The second thing, which we all espouse, I'm sure, is that doctoral education should no longer be taking place in an isolated way, but in doctoral schools with a good infrastructure and preferably internationally. And I can't really imagine that that is going to be feasible in all 4,000 to 5,000 higher education institutions in the EU, let alone all the institutions in the focus countries. So I think there's a real colleague in the UK who said, look, we can't all be research-based institutions, but what must pertain in universities is a commitment to scholarship, and that we can have teachers who are committed to being up to date with where knowledge is, even if they themselves are not actively engaged and being funded for research. And so I just wonder whether there may be some more vocabulary here that we need to develop in terms of the practicalities of what's happening. Concentration in research excellence, concentration of doctoral schools, the fact that in many of our countries there's a low number of staff who've actually got doctoral qualifications.
Okay, thank you, John. Eva, I did not allow you to answer the question before, sorry.
It's
would
okay.
you want to respond to that and to John's question, or...
Well, it was very long. I don't... sorry, I think it was very good what you said, but I didn't quite... Yeah, it was rather a statement, yes. So, but do you want to comment it?
Just a comment to say, in many regards, I agree with what you've said, which was why I deliberately said at the Scottish Enhancement Theme work, I think maybe we've drifted a bit. We have adopted a very broad definition of research because many institutions in the Scottish sector will be earning 15% of the research income you mentioned. So the scholarship around teaching, integration, application. And I think we should be speaking much more about that because I do believe all staff should be engaging in scholarship of some description to enthuse our students in their discipline.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Jerry from the National Agency for Erasmus in Ireland. I don't know the figures for research and background of Irish academics, but I would suspect it's high enough. It would be very rare for somebody without a master's or indeed a PhD in teaching at third level. But what are the consequences for Sweden? Because I would regard Sweden's higher education system as a very fine one. To Professor Nolan, did absenteeism of students feature in your discussions or your background? Because again, I've heard evidence that even for whether it's Harvard or other institutions of higher education, you can have absenteeism, student absenteeism in class of up to 40% on any given day. And where's the problem? Where is the resistance to embracing research based teaching? You mentioned that you need to have incentives, but when you employ incentives, it usually means you're paying somebody to do something they wouldn't ordinarily do of their own choice. Why is it not integral and just part of the business?
How the higher education in Sweden is brilliant, but he finds it hard to understand how the doctoral students, how you have so few that are educated to doctoral level.
We have so few?
Yeah. Did you say 2/3 were not educated to doctoral level? The teachers?
Well, I don't know if I got the question right because I asked Professor Nolan here and she... Could you please repeat it?
The low level.
No. You will have the possibility to discuss the question during the coffee break. I have to
Okay. So lucky me.
No, for the very simple reason that we are now, we are now going to go into the coffee break. After the coffee break, we will be in 3 groups. And the groups will be in building A, not in this building, it's over there. So it's in A, and please check in your program which group you are in, and please be there 10 minutes to 5. 10 minutes to 5, building A in your group. Okay? Thanks a lot for the speakers and for